What's going on today, YouTube? Today I'm going to be talking about my reflections for the year 2022 for my Japanese studies, as a lot of different things happened last year, some things more optimal than others, and I did change a couple of things on how I went about learning Japanese. So I'm going to talk all about that in today's YouTube video, so let's go ahead and jump into those. There is a lot to cover, so hopefully the video is not too long, but I'm just going to go ahead and start from the first thing I want to talk about, and that is the amount of time that I spent learning Japanese last year. The year 2022 was the year that I graduated and was looking for a job, and that took about half of the year. And during that first 6 months, from January to about, I'd say, June, I did not have that much Japanese. I did not study Japanese that much, unfortunately. And so that's one thing that I had to factor in to last year, because I basically didn't study Japanese that actively for about half a year. I did watch YouTube, I did consume it passively, but in my opinion, the passive input has not that much effect unless you're actively studying as well. So that's one thing that I always reflect on, is last year I definitely didn't spend enough time trying to actively learn Japanese. However, that did change a little bit later on in the year, and that's what I'm going to talk about next. Starting in around July until the rest of the year, I really changed the way that I started learning Japanese. So I started learning Japanese in a way by consuming a lot of reading, a lot of text, and a lot of books. So that's where I started to move into. As you can see from one of my series where I was preparing for the JLPT N1, I started just reading a lot of light novels. I would say that is where my methodology, and that's kind of how I'm going about it right now, is I am reading light novels. I'm reading articles on Google. I'm just reading things in Japanese in order to acquire vocabulary and to gain more vocabulary knowledge. And so that is one big change that I had from the beginning of the year and from previous years. When I first started, I was just consuming a lot of anime, which is cool. You can do it that way, but I really wanted to get into more reading, and so I switched over to a more heavy reading approach for learning Japanese, and that's where I stand right now. The more I can read, I think the more vocab I'm going to be able to gain, and there's a lot of credible resources or credible sources out there that claim this is the case as well. So that's what I'm doing. That is one thing that I have moved over into, and we'll see how that goes for me in this year 2023. So other than the reading and the methodology kind of change, it's not too drastic. I was still doing a little bit of reading before that month of July, but the next thing I want to talk about is Anki. So if you've been in the immersion kind of circle, you kind of know what Anki is, the space repetition flashcard system. And my approach to Anki throughout last year varied a lot. So in the beginning of the year, I said that, Anki, you shouldn't be doing as much. And then now, nearing towards the end of the year, nearing towards the end of 2022, I started doing Anki a little bit more. And so I think Anki has its grounds in any language learning routine if you enjoy Anki. So I don't mind Anki. I think I found a way for me to go about doing Anki that allows me to get through it fast and I'd say most efficiently. And that is by plowing through the Anki cards as fast as possible. So Anki cards, before I used to kind of sit and kind of take about 5 to 10 seconds to pass a card. Nowadays, if I take a look at the card and I can't pass it within 2 to 3 seconds, I fail it and I move on. Additionally, one setting change that I did with Anki was I made it to where I have the again button. I can use now the hard button, and then I use the good button. I still don't use the easy button. And so when I use the hard button, I usually only use hard if I either know the meaning of the kanji but can't do the reading, and if I get the meaning right, I'll pass it as hard. Sometimes if I can get the reading but don't really understand the kanji, I might pass it as hard, but most of the time I pass it as I fail it as again. So that's one big setting change, and one big routine change that I did to my Anki was I changed the way that I pass cards and the way that I go about it. This allows me to do Anki in 30 minutes or less, and it kind of makes sense for the way that I want to be able to process kanji and vocabulary, because if I can't read it on the spot, I shouldn't spend when you're reading a novel, you don't spend 5 to 10 seconds per kanji or per word to understand what it means, because that's going to take forever. So if you can't read it, then you just look up the definition so that you can consume as much reading content as possible. And so that's the approach that I've taken towards Anki, and that's the big major change that I've done towards it. I do want to make a video talking about it a little bit, as I do think Anki always deserves its own video, because so many people know about it. If you don't know about Anki, I'm sorry if that sounded like gibberish to you, but we're going to go ahead and continue to the next reflection point. The next one kind of builds upon the first point that I did about not studying enough. Is time management. So a lot of times when you're planning things ahead of time, you can think that you're going to consume Japanese for a certain amount of time. For example, take my JLPT N1 series. I estimated that I would consume about 45 hours of Japanese per week. That did not happen. Absolutely not. I got busy with things, and it turned out to be more along the lines of probably like 10 to 12 hours per week. So setting the expectations for planning ahead of time and taking a look at how much I can actually consume Japanese, I should do my best to not overshoot it and keep it a little bit reasonable, so that, you know, when I don't achieve those absurd numbers, I don't feel dejected, or I don't feel like I haven't accomplished anything. And so that is one big thing, is setting expectations to where it can be manageable, and so that it's not overwhelming. So, you know, when I was planning out that 45 hours per week, it seemed manageable on paper, but in real life, it turns out to be a little bit different. And so, you know, you have to kind of factor that in as well. And that's one big reflection. One big thing that I was thinking about is keeping Japanese manageable, attainable, and at the same time fun. And so, you know, that's kind of hard to do if you're trying to push absurd amounts of hours upon yourself to do something for anything. So that is one big thing is just time management, making sure that my time management is achievable and at the same time efficient for the language. And the next thing, building upon time management, is a pretty big point in my opinion, and that is, why am I learning Japanese? Why am I continuing to learn Japanese? And this falls into time because we only have 24 hours per day. So if you spend absurd amount of time learning something, it better contribute to, you know, to what you want to do and what your goals are, so to speak. So, you know, that is one big thing that I've been thinking about, is in order to learn Japanese to a high level, you need to spend anywhere between 2,000 to 3,000 active hours to get a strong basis in it. You know, I would say that I've spent close to that amount of hours. That kind of puts me at the crossroads of like, okay, is it really efficient for me to be spending so much time trying to learn Japanese, or could I be doing it to learn another skill? And absolutely, I could be using that time to learn another skill. And that is one big dilemma that I always fall into, or have been falling into more recently with learning Japanese. So I have kind of two options. The one option that I see is spend absurd amounts of time trying to learn Japanese or consuming Japanese content, and then that is more efficient than spreading it across a long period of time, or drop it, do it, or consume it just a little bit and go research and do other things. So those are kind of the two that's kind of the crossroads I'm at right now, and I'm still thinking about it, what and how I'm gonna go about crossing this road. I'm trying to take a middle route, so I'm trying to pave a third route to where maybe I can actually learn these skills by learning about them in Japanese. However, for me, that's pretty hard, because a lot of the stuff that I need to be able to comprehend for engineering or science is, I need high levels of Japanese. So I'm kind of in a weird paradigm to where I gotta learn Japanese to consume academic content at that level in order to learn skills that I think are valuable to my career. And yeah, you know, I'll be figuring that out, but that's one big reflection point that I had this for the last year and currently right now, and I could talk a lot about it, but I'm gonna leave it at that. Maybe I can try to find simpler content, or I can maybe brute force my way through the stuff. We'll see. I'm still thinking, but let's move on to the next one. And then the last point is going to be about speaking. So I didn't do much of speaking last year, but I think it's fulfilling to be able to speak and to be able to kind of express yourself in another language, for me, Japanese. And I want to do a little bit more of that this year. Near the end of last year, I started trying to speak at Japanese restaurants where I knew the the owners were Japanese, and I thought that was pretty fulfilling. I thought that was pretty fun, and so I would like to get more of that experience, more of that feeling of being able to express yourself in another language. And I think that would be another motivating factor for me to continue learning Japanese. So I want to be able to get a little bit more of that this year. And I don't think it's bad to be able to output. I know a lot of us that are learning with the input method, where you just consume a lot of input. I think we may fall into this kind of never output until we're perfect. And I agree to some extent that you shouldn't output too early, but I also don't think you should be in silence forever. And so I'm gonna go and just practice outputting. So that is where I stand on speaking. That also could have its own video as well, to where I talk about output, but we'll see once I start outputting a little bit more. And so that pretty much sums it up for some of the reflections and some of the thoughts that I had from last year leading to this year for my Japanese studies. There are a ton of things that I could reflect on, but I think these ones are going to be the biggest. And yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. Let me know what you think down below in the comments, and if you've had any similar reflections, if you've been learning Japanese. But as always, I'll see you again in the next video, and good luck in your journey out there.